I'd known Martini for many, many years, for decades really, and I kept inviting him to come to Harvard to give a lecture, especially after he became the Cardinal Archbishop of Milan. And he always said he'd love to do it, but he was very, very busy and couldn't quite make it and so on. Then I discovered we have a lectureship, an endowed lectureship at Harvard called the Dudleyan Lecture. The instructions for which were laid down many years ago during the colonial period, and one of the items in that lectureship formula had to do with asking the lecturer to discuss the egregious errors of the papist church. This was good old Yankee Protestant radical anti-Catholicism.
How did Martini?
Now that's in the grant. What's that?
How did Martini react to that?
Well, I mean, I thought he has enough of a sense of humor and irony that I thought this will certainly be tempting bait for him. So I got in touch with him and read him that provision, and I said, "Now, how would you like to come and be the Dudleyan lecturer on this topic?" So he first laughed and smiled, of course. Then he said, "Look, if anybody knows about these nefarious things, I sure do." So he accepted the invitation, and he came, and this was 7 years ago. He gave a brilliant, brilliant lecture at Harvard, and we publicized it quite widely, and the room was absolutely crammed with every Roman Catholic priest and lots and lots of laymen from all over the Boston area, in part because it was clear that at that point Martini was a serious possibility for the papacy. This was when John Paul II was really failing, and also because his reputation as a thoughtful, open, ecumenical guy was pretty widely known, and also his reputation as a scholar. One of the things he did when he came to Harvard for that lecture was to have a long meeting with our New Testament and Biblical department. He's a recognized scholar in that field. So he gave a lecture on the future of the church. That's what he decided to talk about. And it was utterly brilliant, far-seeing, and again, not an in-your-face challenge, but just here are suggestions for how we in the church have to meet the challenges of this new millennium.
Okay. And you have written about that too, from your perspective.
Yes, I have.
The future of what was your book? The Future of Faith.
It's called The Future of Faith, and I actually have a chapter in The Future of Faith on my own idea of the future of the papacy. Which Martini had read, by the way, and told me he appreciated it. So I was hoping that if he ever did become Pope, maybe some of those ideas would spring off the page and actually go into action. Unlike many Protestants, which I am, I think the papacy does have a role in the international Christian community. Historically, the Bishop of Rome has been the one who brings parties together, who are unable to agree with each other, who negotiates, who helps people, helps make the peace. And I was at a conference 25 years ago in Rome. It was the conference where I first met Martini, where they actually brought together people from completely outside of religious communities. I mean, skeptics and Marxists and atheists and so on, along with theologians, to talk about what would be a constructive conversation between believers and non-believers. And I thought, this is something hardly anybody can do except the Vatican. And he liked that idea very much.
When Cardinal Martini was Archbishop of Milan, he welcomed people of different religions, right?
Oh yes,
he welcomed Muslims there.
Right. He had the most thoughtful and engaging program that I know of any Catholic diocese in Europe, especially urging and encouraging Catholic lay families to welcome Muslim immigrants, welcome them warmly, bring them invite them to dinner, make friends with them.
And he had a you told me he had a famous late afternoon worship service for anybody, for non-believers or anybody who wanted to come.
That's right. Anybody, you know, there's a beautiful, beautiful, large historic cathedral there in Milan. And when he became the Archbishop of Milan, he noticed there were just many, 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 many young people in Milan, young professionals, other workers and other people, students, who were really not paying much attention to the church, but who seemed to be searching for some kind of a meaning, some purpose in life. And what he did, it was an ingenious idea. He opened the cathedral several days a week at 5 in the afternoon, at the end of the workday, and simply had great choral and organ music from the Christian tradition and also occasionally from other traditions, and a couple brief readings. And there was no sermon, there was no liturgy, there was no communion, just a place to sit and think, calm down, meditate, pray if you wanted to. And thousands, literally thousands of people started attending this late afternoon service. So he opened it in other churches in Milan and strongly recommended that it be instituted in other parts of the church. I wish it had. I don't think it has yet. But it was. You have to understand that Martini, in addition to being a cardinal, was a pastor. He liked to think of himself as the pastor of a Christian community in Milan, this big, thriving city of style and money and investments and so on, rather secularly oriented. He was the pastor, and that's really a role that he took to with great relish.
One of the things that's been going on in many places, certainly in this country, has been the increase over recent years in the number of people who describe themselves as unaffiliated with any church or any religious organization. They're sometimes called the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. You've written about this too in the Future of Faith, and I'm wondering what you make of this rapid rise, up to almost 20%, of the people who say they have no religious affiliation.
Yeah, these are the people that often describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. And it's one of my friends calls it the fastest growing denomination in America. And I think that's true. And I've had a couple occasions where students of mine in courses and seminars have interviewed lots of people who describe themselves that way, unaffiliated. Notice that they don't want to call themselves atheists. These are people who are still very much in search mode, who are looking, who are actively seeking some kind of meaning, some kind of path in life, but they really don't like the doctrines and institutional structures through which we have inherited much of the Christian message. They want to get at what is essential, to touch on that mystery, that depth, without all of the furniture that goes along with it. So I think that's a great opening. I understand why there's a lot of that objection to the doctrinal institutional patterns that we've inherited. Many of them are quite outdated. And I think in that sense, when Martini said the church is 200 years behind, I think in that respect it is too. Many of these things are things that we simply brought along because they were there. He was experimenting precisely in a way to reach out to those people, to provide a context in which they could think, they could ask questions. After his brief afternoon service, there was always a chance to get together and ask questions and discuss, to come from where they were and not to immediately have something imposed on them.
What do you think?
I think that development is a healthy one.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Professor Cox, what do you think the churches in the United States, especially the Protestant mainline churches, should do now to reach out to this group of unaffiliated people, do the kind of thing and the kind of spirit that Martini did in Milan? What do you think we need to do?
Well, we need to try different things. That was what Martini was advocating. Try this, try that. Context means everything. Creating venues, places where people can come and discuss and raise their issues, voice their complaints, where there are people who know a little bit about Christianity and who can talk with them and respond to them. There's a wonderful coffee bar in Rome that I visited just last year, which was opened just a few years ago, where they do precisely that. There are lay people from the local parish, and it's staffed by these people and also by handicapped people, and you get a very good cappuccino there, but you can always count on the fact that there's a great conversation about the searching, deeper issues of life that's going on, in which there isn't any kind of preordained agenda that's being inflicted on you. It's an open setting. We need to keep working and experimenting with opening up the setting and realizing that the actual step into a religious tradition has to be one with a lot of different entrances and not just one.
Mm-hmm. And you've spoken also and written about what you call the age of spirit in your book, The Future of Faith, as opposed to what? Previous ages of beliefs?
Well, what I call the
rules,
age of belief.
Yeah.
I think the big mistake, the really tragic turn that Christianity made was under Constantine. When Constantine decided, for imperial purposes, after all, he was the emperor. He was not a church leader. That the entire Christian world around the Mediterranean at the time needed a single creed. There had not been a single creed. There hadn't been hardly any creeds at all for the first 300 years of Christianity. We'd gotten along very well without them. A great variety of different expressions of Christianity were thriving. But he wanted it to be uniform, and so he called all the bishops together, and they drew up what we call the Nicene Creed, and said everybody has to toe the line with this creed, or they're out of the club. And being out of the club at that point meant not only heresy but treason, because the emperor was Emperor Constantine, and his successors were enforcing this. And I think that was a very, very serious misstep. And that whole idea that being a Christian therefore means subscribing to a list of beliefs is fatally mistaken. Mm-hmm. For the first 300 years, there wasn't any such list of beliefs. It was what I call the first 300 years of Christianity was the age of faith, in which being part of a community that was following Jesus, which was trying to continue the work that he had started on earth, with a variety of different interpretations of what that meant, had obtained. But after that, we entered into this creedal period, which in my mind was a disaster, because no creed ever did that. I mean, the Nicene Creed did not unify Christianity. And then after that, there was another creed and another creed, another one contradicting the other up until the Reformation, when there were contending confessions and creeds. It has never worked. And I think it's been a disservice to think of Christianity as mainly a creedal structure. So now, in the last, less than a century, I see another age emerging, which I call the age of the Spirit, in which the inner essence and power of the idea of the kingdom of God, of the love of Jesus, of the fellowship of the Spirit, seem to be emerging just as the emphasis on hierarchy and institution and doctrine are diminishing. And I think that's a good step.
And do you see it happening? Do you think that's going on now in this country?
Oh yes, I think it is happening. Especially if you look at what's happening among young people, I see it happening, but I see it happening in many places around the country. There's resistance to it, of course. Whenever you have that kind of a change, a kind of positive change in Christianity or any other movement, you evoke a response. Fundamentalism has been the response to this trend. So I see the trend that I'm talking about here as emerging 100 or 120, 30 years ago. And just then, of course, fundamentalism was also emerging in America as a reaction against these positive developments. A re-emphasis on creed, a re-emphasis on hierarchy, a re-emphasis indeed on male dominance within Christianity. But I think it is a reaction, and I think it's fated for what happens to most reactions. They play themselves out, and the underlying tidal change then continues. It'll take a while, but I certainly do see it happening. I'm very, very hopeful on that score.